Right, so in this video we're going to be going over the named items again. But in this one we're going to be doing it slightly differently than the previous video. We're actually going to be comparing them against what is effectively the meta. So all of the ARs are essentially going to be compared to the best AR in the game, FAMAS. All of the SMGs are going to be compared to the best SMG. Also incorporating all of the builds that they are able to utilize, and then we're going to grade them the way we have been previously. So if you haven't watched the first one, I do recommend, but just in case, obviously we're going to be using S tier as our god tier, all the way down to F tier, in which case meh. Now a lot of this is going to seem quite controversial, and I get it, and one thing I do want to stress is, because I'm adding in two new brackets for this, M being this is a meta weapon, there's like two of them, and X, which is basically I wouldn't even bloody bother, delete on sight. This does not mean that you have to not use them or just try and throw things out there to spitball. For example, something like Everlasting Gaze is technically it's an X. There's no point to it actually existing, as much as people are going to hate me for saying that. However, even I use Everlasting Gaze. I say even I like I'm some sort of arbiter in this scenario. I'm not. Harmony, technically an X. There's no point to it, like from a mathematical standpoint, there's no point to it existing. But I even use Harmony. Like I use Harmony, I like it. And then Artist Tool, another X. When we compare them, essentially all of the rifles near enough are just flat X, simply because they're not an M1A, which should hopefully just highlight just how unbalanced rifles are and just how OP within that rifle space the M1A series actually is. Harmony, just get an M1A within sync. You're doing more, you're doing better, works better. Everlasting Gaze, just get an M1A with perpetuation on it. There's literally no difference other than the cooldown. It goes from being 16 seconds with perfect and 20 seconds with normal. This isn't going to matter or change your overall playstyle, but the M1A is 1, more accurate, 2, more stable, 3, more damage. So in these spaces, it kind of does get a lot kind of annoying and a bit convoluted, but hopefully we can use our big brain, put our big boy pants on or big girl pants on, just get on with it and just realize that just because something is theoretically or mathematically terrible and shouldn't exist doesn't mean we can't use it. Anyway, let's crack on with the show. So on screen now is a list of all of the named ARs, just to give a quick recap. Manic, perfect overflowing. Invisible Hand, perfect Allegro. Shield Splinterer, perfect Optimist. Burnout, perfect on empty. Savage Wolverine, perfectly close and personal. Pyromaniac, perfectly ignited. Glory Days, perfectly nearsighted. Mechanical Animal, future perfection. Test Subject, perfectly in sync. Kingraker, perfect flatline. And then Rouse Splitter, perfectly accurate. Now annoyingly, when we're comparing these to the meta, I suppose you could say, or the best in slot, we're essentially all going to get compared to a FAMAS or other top tier ARs. So in this regard, Manic is going to lose out on DPS, burst, and most likely sustained as well. I'd need to check, but either way, it'll be close. Simply just because of fast hands. It's a very prominent end game setup, FAMAS fast hands. So the only thing at this point Manic actually has going for it is the overall magazine damage, but then when you add in the accuracy and stability over the range game, it's probably going to be quite likely that they'll end up quite even, considering how much more accurate and stable FAMAS is over an AK. Invisible Hand is a named AUG with perfect Allegro as its talent. Now that increase in fire rate does get it quite close to some top tier ARs. The difference is a lot of the top tier ARs, even with perfect Allegro, still have a faster fire rate, and we can still put a damage talent on. Shield Splinterer is an A tier. I would love this to be an S, but to be perfectly honest, the only way this compares to a FAMAS is if we put Optimist on a FAMAS as well, at which point Shield Splinterer will do a ball hair more. Problem is, we have Flatline, Sadist, Strained. There's more usability, more customization. It just pushes FAMAS that little bit further ahead than Shield Splinterer. So we're going to have to give it an A. Burnout. Now, both of these weapons essentially are going to be a FAMAS. We're comparing a FAMAS to a FAMAS. The problem here is, one, It's not a damage talent. So if we wanted to go for more DPS, a damage talent is going to be better in this scenario. Then 2, we're unable to constantly refresh that weapon handling. That weapon handling from perfect on empty is quite nice. It's 40%, lasts for 10 seconds. That's like 3 magazines worth. Well, 2 with like a reload and a bit in. But we can't refresh it actively, unlike fast hands. Savage Wolverine, this still comes in with the same problem. Theoretically, it will outperform a FAMAS, but you're going to have to play a full red build with Savage Wolverine. Good luck doing that. Pyromaniac, we're going to give a B, despite the fact that, technically speaking, Pyromaniac is able to outperform a FAMAS no matter what you do to it. It is still hinging on you being in multiplayer with someone playing Eclipse permanently. There's no other way currently in this game, even with the Ortiz Exoro set coming, there is no way in the game other than Eclipse to essentially have everything on fire for the vast majority of the time. Glory Days, D tier, although Glory Days at the P416 is still a very good AR, and I would recommend it to a good amount of people. The problem with it, quite simply, is it's mostly used for chems. That's literally it, which is kind of sad. Mechanical Animal is also going to get a D tier. The main reason for this is just the difference between Future Perfection and Future Perfect. Perfection being the named variation. It is literally just the time in which those charges stay active. It's like a difference of like 4-5 seconds. The overall buff it gives and allows is the exact same. There's no difference. So Mechanical Animal is going to get a D. Test Subject, the only thing that really why this is not a D is just there is a damage difference between perfect in sync and normal in sync, but in terms of overall performance, still a FAMAS is able to make up for that difference, so it's not really going to hold its own. Kingbreaker here is going to be an A. Admittedly, if you're playing a pulse build, Heartbreaker, or just utilizing Night Watcher, etc., top end damage at full stacks, Kingbreaker is the highest DPS weapon when it comes to pulse builds. Problem is its accuracy and its stability, and this is also the only area where it really holds that. Every other situation, it loses out. Want to play a normal DPS build without the use of Flatline? A TKB with Optimist is going to infinitely lose out to a FAMAS with Optimist. I say infinitely like it's actually going to be a big gap. The overall gap between all of the ARs is like 15%. They're very, very, very close. It's kind of unreal. Rail Splitter is kind of a bit of an outlier, and the main reason for this is they both have the same fire rate. However, the Rail Splitter has lower bullet for bullet damage than the FAMAS. Both CTAR and FAMAS are the only 2 weapons or ARs that have 900 RPM. They're pretty close in their DPS. The difference is, how much is that accuracy going to make a difference to you? I would argue a lot of people are going to say not a lot. I would rather have Burnout, for example. Now we're going to move into LMGs, and just again, refresher: Dare, perfect flatline; Tabula Rasa, perfectly steady-handed; Black Friday, perfectly unhinged; Good Times, perfect fast hands; Stinger with Swift. Why is it not perfect Swift? Sleipnir, perfect frenzy; Big Show, perfect thunderstrike; Carnage, perfect sadist; New Reliable, perfectly optimized; Quiet Roar, perfectly overwhelmed. Now to start things off, we're going to be looking at Dare. Dare is an X, simply just because, one, just put flatline on an L86 or an RPK. I've just doubled your damage. You're welcome. Next is just the simple fact that we can't even put the technician laser on the damn thing. So it's like saying, hey, have a car that doesn't have an engine. It's like, brilliant. Tabula Rasa, technically also an X. The weapon with the talent, they're both very good weapon, very good talent. They just don't work well together, simply just because of the overall magazine size that Tabula Rasa actually has. Along with, it still has that really annoying problem of being an LMG. Black Friday, X, simply just because the cons outweigh the pros. Don't get me wrong. The damage you can get out of this weapon are brilliant, but damage doesn't really mean anything if you can't actually hit anything. So, X. Good Times, B tier. Although fast hands on an LMG is absolutely amazing. Like, it really does solve the reload issue. The big problem with it is still it's an LMG, and despite the fact that the M60 is a fan favorite, it's not the best LMG by far, if at all. Stinger, I'm going to have to be kind here and just do question mark D tier, simply because, again, I don't have this weapon. Some people have sent me footage of them utilising this weapon and trying to get it to work. It seems a bit weird and wafty. It potentially could be pretty good, especially if you're able to get like an Intimidate, Adrenaline Rush build, or even Leadership, doing cover to cover, get close, pair it with Ninja Pike, Messenger Knees. You can potentially get something out of it, but it's going to be a weird, wafty playstyle, and in overall performance, it's not really going to count for much. Up next, we have Sleipnir. This is for open world and just generally running around like a lunatic, like we all do. Probably a C tier. It's very worthwhile. It's got a lot of damage to it, especially if you're able to constantly refresh the frenzy proc, which can get annoying, which is probably why it's C tier. Probably should be D, ideally, just because refreshing that frenzy is kind of irritating. However, if you can get it into something like the Iron Horse raid or even Dark Hours for doing absolute DPS checks, not a lot is actually able to beat out Sleipnir. It's kind of insane. Big Show, Big X. Just the talent is fucking awful. It really is. There is no reliable way for us to electrocute things on repeat, like at all, in a controlled environment, unless you're going at 1 mile an hour so that you're constantly able to throw out the shock trap. That's the only reliable source we've got, and it's got like a 40-second cooldown. If anyone thinks that they're able to constantly proc Thunderstrike, join me on one of my streams. We will get you through Legendary DUA in about 10 minutes, 8 to 10 minutes, and I guarantee you, you will not be able to throw out your shock trap in time before a room is dead. It is not happening. Carnage, D tier. Main reason for this is it is a usable weapon, it is quite entertaining, it is quite fun, but the only real area where this weapon fits is going to be an ongoing directive build. But then at the same time, get an L86. Again, congratulations, get an L86 with Sadist on, you're welcome, I've doubled your damage. New Reliable, B tier. This is probably the best named LMG, and it is simply just because it's an RPK with increased weapon handling, which solves so many issues around the LMG, and it just leaves it with the big issue of being an actual LMG. That's literally it. Where it's a magazine reload and not a belt reload, the handling doesn't have too much to do with the reload, simply because we don't have like a 5-6 second reload anyway. I believe it's like 2.4, 2.5 seconds, around there. It's a longer magazine reload than an AR, but it's not quite a full belt reload. But the accuracy and stability is very, very welcome. Quiet Roar X. The talent makes no sense at all. Suppressing an enemy that is not currently suppressed grants 12% weapon damage for 12 seconds. Max stack is 4 seconds. Max stack is 4. Sorry. Like, great. Everything's suppressed. I've got all this damage, but nowhere to put it because everything's fucking suppressed. Idiot. Now moving into SMGs, which is quite a fun one. We have The Grudge with Perfect Vindictive, Cabaret, Perfect Thunderstrike, Swap Chain, Perfect Unwavering, Safety Distance, Perfect Outsider, The Apartment, Perfectly Measured, Emmeline's Guard, Perfect Preservation, Slayer, Hidden Rock, Cold Relations, Perfectly Strained, and Dark Winter, Perfect Killer. So, starting this off is going to be The Grudge. This is an A tier weapon. 1, the damage you guys should get from this natively is pretty awesome. 2, there are many sources of status in this game, and we're easily able to make that concession to get a status in our build, regardless of what it would be, which allows us to get a hell of a lot more crit chance, a hell of a lot more crit damage, and it will also help buff our team. It is, in effect, another Coyotes, which is very powerful. Cabaret X, same reason as Big Show. There is no way to reliably proc shock on enemies. It's not going to happen. Swap Chain, this is a C tier. However, this is kind of an unreliable C tier, simply just because natively this weapon isn't really worth much. However, there are some absolutely amazing builds out there that can utilize unwavering very, very effectively. Perfect unwavering is going to give you a little bit more. It's also going to be very, very useful. Downside to this being is we're potentially able to get more out of this on other better SMGs utilizing the exact same mechanic. Safety distance, D tier. The only real benefit to this weapon is just being able to utilize perfect focus with an SMG. That is literally it. Don't get me wrong, in this scenario with perfect focus, it does theoretically become the most powerful SMG in the game just because it is able to reliably utilize perfect focus. But other than that, no, it's pretty damn terrible. The apartment, X, because it has perfectly measured on it. It's like saying it's more perfectly shit. Like, measured is so bad, it's generally unreal. Emmeline's Guard, D tier, because we're now comparing it to other SMGs. Don't get me wrong, perfect preservation is one of my favorites, just preservation in general. It's going to be very powerful, but where it's going to be essentially armor on kill, utilizing something like a Vector, which is more able to get those kills so that you can get preservation to proc, is just going to infinitely leave it in the dust. Slayer, X. Don't get me wrong, Hidden Rock is amazing. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Rock just sounds awesome. However, it's Slayer. I don't think I need to go into like more detail as to why Slayer is bad. Or any detail at all. Cold Relations, D tier. Now, some people are going to get upset by this just because of how powerful Perfect Strained is. But when we actually start comparing it against something like a Vector, MPX, that we can also put Strained on, yeah, we soon realise that there's a problem. Caveat to this, if you're going to put Vector Strained on a Vector, don't use Strikers, please. You're not going to get the full effect of Strained. Dark Winter, A tier. Vector is the most powerful SMG category in the game. However, the thing that kind of holds this back from being S tier is just the simple fact that Killer is RNG. Despite the fact that Dark Winter is theoretically the meta SMG, we're still relying on RNG, which does kind of hold it back, and it's also one of the main reasons a lot of people don't like it. They don't like incorporating RNG into their build. Oh, I could have killed that enemy if just Killer had procced. Killer didn't proc, you'd be better off just going Optimus, you probably would have got the kill, and there's no reliance on RNG, just pull the trigger. Now we move into shotguns. Now, one thing I need to clarify before we get into this, despite the fact that some of these are going to have X's and A's and B's and C's, when you're comparing shotguns, you're literally comparing the tonnage of nuclear warheads. So I'm literally splitting hairs here, okay? So try not to read too much into it, but in terms of tiering, there's not really much to it. So we're going to start with Rock and Roll, perfectly extra. Lefty, perfect Sledgehammer. Boomstick, perfect pumped up. Firestarter, primer rounds. Send off, safety distance. Named M870, nearly got me. Perfect Jazz Hands. Tsunami, perfect pummel. Backup Boomstick has 16% shotgun damage. Enforcer, perfect pummel. And then the Mop with 10% armor on kill. To start things off, we're going to be looking at Rock and Roll. A tier. ACS-12 doesn't really have a place like in the meta scene, just simply because its biggest trick is going to be its overall magazine damage. But in terms of performance and how we utilize it, it performs perfectly well, and there's nothing really to scoff at. That being said, Lefty, also a named ACS-12, kind of does fall short, so we're going to give this an A tier, and this is simply just because it is very heavily reliant on Sledgehammer being active, and I don't know about you guys, but other than the occasional speed run, we very rarely use Sledgehammer. Boomstick, C tier, it's a very powerful shotgun, and you're basically able to just infinitely proc and activate its talent just by reloading. However, in terms of overall performance, it is going to fall short due to things like the M870 and Super 90 existing. Firestarter, B tier, despite the fact that this has the damage of a double barrel, which is nothing to scoff at, the main reason for this existing is going to simply just be on Eclipse build, and it allows us to set the enemies that are typically immune to fire, such as the Cleaner Chungers, as well as Warhounds. It does allow us to set them on fire by reducing their fire resistance. Send off, C tier. KSG again is technically the worst shotgun in the game, but I do know a lot of people like it. has a very large magazine, and it also does alleviate one of the issues that shotguns have, which is going to be its optimal range. However, I personally don't really see this as like a benefit or an issue, simply because if you're using a shotgun, you're most likely making that conscious choice to be closer. The named M870 B tier, although this doesn't really directly come in use anywhere, simply just because M870 with pummel is going to be more effective, there are going to be a certain few scenarios where you just need to get that one shotgun shot off, reload, and then swap to a different weapon, such as Regulus. This is typically done within speedrunning with the Headhunter's Fury build. In this scenario, it is very powerful, it is very useful, and typically shotguns that reload shell by shell, such as the M870 or Super 90, do have a very, very slow and painful reload, and you end up just sort of going bang, reload, bang, reload, bang, reload. At least with the named M870, you can alleviate some of that. Tsunami, B tier. Now, the Tactical Sausage isn't actually one of the best shotguns in the game, but due to the fact of the ease that you're able to constantly proc perfect pummel, this does end up being a pretty top tier-ish weapon, and you're able to get quite a lot out of it. In fact, it will absolutely outperform the Enforcer in this scenario, simply because it has one more attribute. Backup Boomstick, C tier. Now, theoretically, this is actually really powerful, but typically, if we're going to be utilizing and consuming that pistol slot, we want it to be something a bit more worthwhile, such as the TDI card custom. This doesn't really fit anywhere into this specific scenario or mix-up. Enforcer X, simply just because it is missing that attribute. A Super 90 with that extra attribute is able to outperform Enforcer with pummel active. The Enforcer doesn't need pummel active. Effectively, you can get Enforcer with pummel damage just by using a Super 90, and then you don't actually have to. You can put whatever talent you want on then, and you're still going to do more. Tsunami is able to outperform this weapon. It's the only shotgun I would give an X to, simply just because you're able to get so much more out of so many other things. The Mop, D tier. Now, some people are going to be angry with this, but let's face it, the main reason a lot of people are going to utilize this weapon is as a utility to help them survive. It's not really going to be there for damage, and when you go for the damage route with the Mop, you're better off just using a normal 612 with preservation on and removing that 10% armor on kill and put Detox on there. It's going to give you more damage, and it's also still going to give you that 10% armor on kill. So we're now moving into rifles. Don't worry, we're nearly done. First up, we have the Virginian, Perfect Boomerang, Baker's Dozen, Perfect Lucky Shot, Stage Left, Perfect Sledgehammer, Surge, Perfect Spike, Everlasting Gaze, Perfect Perpetuation, Harmony, Perfect In Sync, and Artist Tool, Perfect Rifleman. Let's start this off with one of the actual few rifles that is actually worth something, which is going to be the Virginian. However, this still is a C tier. The main reason for this is the Virginian, or the 1886 overall, works better with a rifleman headshot setup due to how accurate and stable it is. Going for something like Perfect Boomerang, I would actually argue is going to be a larger magazine sort of setup, simply just because it's going to allow you to get more sustainability out of the rifle. Admittedly, this does kind of make sense because the 1886 only has a 5-round magazine, but the overall performance of this in that longevity is kind of lackluster, and if you're going to go that side, you might as well just use an M1A anyway. Baker's Dozen X. Now, I had a long discussion about this with Rousey, and annoyingly, I just won't budge on it. See, the argument for me that, well, it's still an M1A, it's still got to be a good weapon, is all well and good. The problem is, increases the magazine size by 30%. Great. Not needed, but great. Whatever. Missed shots from cover have a 100% chance to be returned to the magazine. So now if we play bad, we get a reward. I don't do participation trophies over here. If you want to get better, hit your shots. Get an M1A with Rifleman. Baker's Dozen is categorically not worth it. Stage Left, D tier. Reason for this, don't get me wrong, the SOCOM M1A is still an M1A, it's pretty powerful, it's slightly lower damage than the CQB, and Stage Left has a magical increase in RPM. However, the main benefit to this is going to be hitting things with Sledgehammer, and I'm not going to be alone when I say that the only times I ever really use Sledgehammer is I'll throw a grenade out, hold the weapon with Sledgehammer on till the grenade goes off, procs, and then I swap to another weapon. Don't get me wrong, the M1A here is going to be very powerful, but still not that great. The Surge X, headshots grant 25% skill damage for 15 seconds. The overall difference between this and just the normal Surge talent is kind of lackluster. I mean, the difference between Spike and Perfect Spike is 5% skill damage, which you're hardly going to notice. And if you're going for headshots, why are you not using Rifleman? Everlasting Gaze X. Again, headshots grant 50% status effect damage, and the duration of the status effect is increased by 50%. The difference between Perfect and Normal is the cooldown. Normal is 20, Perfect is 16. If you're going to be going for headshots, again, M1A, deal with the cooldown. Harmony X. Don't get me wrong, Perfect In Sync is a good talent. I utilize Harmony. However, the real problem here is just quite simply that damage that you'll be missing from In Sync can be easily made up for just by using an M1A. Perfect Rifleman with Artist Tool. Again, X. Like, why are rifles so friggin' bad? Like, seriously. Despite the fact that Artist Tool is theoretically able to keep up with classic M1A damage, it does mean that you'll be having to spam the SIG 716 at maximum RPM, and at which point you're not going to be hitting a damn thing. You're better off slowing it down, taking a heavier weapon that fires slower but hits harder, such as, I don't know, M1A? Yeah, probably. And at that point, you're able to get better damage. So, we're finally on MMR, which is nice. Up first we have White Death, which has 137% headshot damage. O'Carroll, another 130% headshot damage, but it also consumes the talent by giving us twinkly lights when we get a headshot in the dark. Ekim's Longstick for Perfect Ranger. The Darkness with Perfect Eyeless. Designated Hitter for Perfect Reformation. Pinprick for Perfect First Blood. Commando for Perfectly Naked. Relic for Perfectly Determined, and then Scalpel for Future Perfection. Now, the annoying thing with the MMRs is essentially they're all going to be compared to the meta weapon, which is the White Death, so obviously we're starting this off with M. If you need an explanation as to why the White Death is classed as the meta MMR, then you've not been paying attention. Has the highest headshot damage, has one of the highest single shot damages in the game. It's only really beaten out by a few weapons, one of which has to be a specialization weapon, and another is an exotic. So Sharpshooter, TAC 50, and then the Nemesis AWM. After that, we do have O'Carroll, despite the fact that these are both M44s. The difference with O'Carroll and why it's a C tier is we don't get to utilize the talent, and the talent is pretty damn bad. Despite the fact that it is a meme weapon, it is still a very good meme weapon. Now we have Ekim's Longstick. The M700 used to be one of the best MMRs in the game, however, despite what some people might tell you, Ranger is actually not that good. In order to actually make up for the difference in damage between Ekim's Longstick and the White Death, you need to be shooting at a range of like 120 meters, which is actually impossible because the bullets just phase out of existence past 100 meters. And despite the fact that these are MMRs, their optimal range is quite lackluster, to be perfectly honest. I mean, for example, the optimal range of Ekim's Longstick is like 42 meters. It's not an MMR to me, that's like maybe a rifle. So yeah, thanks but no thanks. After that, we basically just get a series of X's with the Darkness. No reasons needed as to why this can't compete with the White Death. Designated Hitter, X. Like, it's a medic build on an MMR. Like, I don't understand it. It's very strange. Commando, SVD has fallen very far from grace, and then giving us a talent which helps against unarmored enemies rather than armored enemies is a bit weird. Relic, honestly, this thing should just be fucking deleted on sight. Why it exists, I don't know. It's a talent that requires you to maintain headshots. but it doesn't have the damage to be able to actually maintain headshots. So you go, okay, I'll use it as a DPS and just, if I get lucky with a headshot, I get lucky with a headshot. The accuracy and stability on this thing is frigging awful. It's unable to perform in any situation. And then we have Scalpel. Now for the bolt actions, this is the lowest damage. However, it is also the highest DPS of the bolt action MMRs. And my personal opinion, it's also kind of the reasons why it's not an X and D at the bottom. It's Future Perfection or Future Perfect is one of the best talents to actually put on an MMR, simply because you're able to use it very, very well in conjunction with Achilles Pulse. That's literally it. Last on this list, we do have Pinprick, and I've left Pinprick till last. Didn't forget it. I've left Pinprick till last simply just because it's an SRS, which isn't the worst MMR. It's not the best, certainly not the best, but it's not the worst thing going. However, perfect first blood. If scoped, your first 2 shots fired out of combat or after fully reloading from empty deal headshot damage to any part of the body you hit. Requires a scope with 8 times magnification or higher. This is it's a semi-decent MMR, and that's a really good talent. However, I feel like the internal mechanics of the Division basically negate this, simply because the moment you fire, everything knows where you are. So you get that first shot for free, which basically means nothing, because you're going to line up that headshot anyway. Because if you're not in combat and you've got time to line up that headshot, you're going to line up that headshot, which then means first shot after you reload will apply headshot to wherever you hit. This is really handy. However, I kind of feel like it's at this point just poor man's determined, and if you mix in something like Headhunter, it's kind of just defeated from the off. This weapon would potentially be an A tier if 1, Determined didn't exist, and 2, Headhunter didn't exist. Third option would be just because the mechanics of the game don't really allow for this talent to actually shine, which is kind of sad. Then finally, last but certainly not least, we are moving into pistols. Now, I'm not covering all of these simply because some of them are from specializations, but we are going to be covering Orbit with Perfect Finisher, Prophet with Perfectly Determined. We're going to skip the Sharpshooters 93R Survivalist D50, Mozambique Special with Perfect Breadbasket, Lightning Rod with Perfect Salvage, and then the TDI card Custom, which has a skill tier when used. Now, despite my ranting and ravings and my absolute love for Orbit, we are going to give this a C tier, despite the fact that it can compete and actually outperform Coyote's Mask. The idea behind a pistol would be to utilize it when needed, or for it to actually have a greater benefit. Constantly swapping to and from the weapon just to try and keep that buff active is typically annoying, along with the fact that the buff only lasts for 15 seconds, whereas the main utilization tool of utilizing the Orbit takes 30 seconds, which kind of just makes it really annoying. So it's not like it's particularly bad, it's just a ball ache to utilize. Next is Mozambique Special at D tier. Mozambique Special, I kind of would argue, isn't exactly the worst pistol. Considering pistols have great headshot damage, having a tool that allows us to get 50% more headshot damage per stack, allowing for 2 stacks, effectively doubling our headshot damage, isn't the worst thing going. Problem is, we would all much prefer this to be on something like a Magnum, for example. Then we have Lightning Rod. Now, Lightning Rod's kind of a bit annoying simply just because it just doesn't make sense. Like, we have an infinite ammo pool anyway, so why is it that when killing things we have an 85% chance to refill our magazine? I kind of feel like, I don't know, Boomerang would be better in this situation. At least that way we get something a bit more out of it independently, rather than more ammo from a magical pool of ammo that technically doesn't even exist in the first place. TDI card Custom, M for meta, and the main reason for this is just simply that skill tier. It is a meta weapon, however it will typically come into play when you're not utilizing an exotic pistol, Liberty, Regulus, etc. Your main focus is going to be on your AR or your DPS, but if you need to get a bit of extra healing or revive a friend, etc, etc, be able to swap to the TDI card Custom, throw your Revive Hive out, pick up an ally, and then pick up your Revive Hive, removing the TDI card Custom, still leaving you with 1 recharge on that Revive Hive is really handy. It's typically only really used in group play, but it is a very, very useful and handy item to have. And then finally, last and probably least, Prophet X. Now the reason this is an X, despite the fact that theoretically it's not the worst pistol going, and Perfect Determined is working correctly, and it's not theoretically the worst talent. The problem is this talent with this pistol puts it in direct competition with the big boy, Regulus. And whatever you think you can do with Determined, or Prophet with Perfect Determined, Regulus can do so much better, to a point of where there's no point this pistol actually existing, which is kind of annoying. Anyway, that is going to cover it for this video. Sorry it was so long, but there's a lot to go over. Hopefully soon we're going to be going over the named gear pieces, which means all of this starts again. Have fun, good luck, don't die. It's bad for the health.